We'll get started then. You got this? Want to hold on to it, or you want to dance? All right, everybody. It's good to be back at ConVerge for the third year. Great conference, and it's been my pleasure to be part of it each year. Hope you don't remember my talk last year. I'm still getting that one off. But my name's Charles Herring. For those of you that I haven't had an opportunity to meet yet, my career in information security started in 2002. It was at the tail end of my active duty in the Navy. I served as a network security officer for the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School. After leaving that gig, I did consulting work with largely the federal government for about 7 years and worked for InfoSec magazine in their test center. I left that in 2012 to work for a company called Ranco, a security company. It was acquired by Cisco. So my day job is a security specialist, or something like that, for Cisco system. And I love this conference so much that I picked up a couple of guys on the road here, mostly to let me breathe, because I don't breathe when I'm talking. And I want you to meet them, so let's do that. Let's do that.
So, I'm Jim Clark. I'm the lead information and security engineer for the University of Chicago.
I'm Bill Rich. I'm actually only here because I'm Charles' parole agent. In addition to that, I have 16 years in law enforcement. The vast majority of that time is spent in South Central Los Angeles working gang enforcement and homicide investigations. Looking forward to being here. Thanks. Technology.
Stupid RF. I don't know. All right, I'm going to get hung up on that. That's going to mess with my dance a bit. So, my day-to-day job right now is I work with private and public sector and work with information security teams, incident response teams, security operations center, and I have spent the last 4 years as a tool vendor. And so I show up and I'm trying to sell a tool to solve a problem, and always running into this problem that the teams are overwhelmed. There's too much information, or the information is not the right information at the right time, and there's constant failure happening. It's exhausting. But every day we don't leave work with the job completely done. And that's not a place the craft should be. Any craft should have to live in. And so a group of us, about 14 of us now, in the WIT Food Project, most of us part-time volunteers like myself. We have a handful of full-time guys working on this mission of maturing and operationalizing the craft of information security. And we're going to talk about some of the areas of research, one area in particular today. But we break our research into two different big buckets. One is, how do we reduce the event count without losing something? Instead of us having millions of events a day, how do we get a higher level amount of information that we can respond to? So reducing the recycle to respond to. And the other, that's called through the craft internally. And then own the craft, or through the noise. And then own the craft is reducing the amount of time spent in each cycle. And so we're doing some interesting things in both of those areas. The name WIT Foo is just wit, like genius foo, like a little bit of skill in action, so genius, and that's what we came up with. Had other names, all of which were vetoed very quickly. That was the best one to go with. So today we're going to talk about, oh man, oh, I know what it is. What is it? Talk amongst yourself. Topic. Presenters that come unprepared, all right. All right. Yeah, guy, did you not know that this was what you were doing today? Okay, I got it. I know how PowerPoints work. Don't you guys really? There we go.
Stop yelling at us.
Yeah. I mean, well, we practiced. So we actually practiced today, and this is what happens anytime you practice. We weren't even demoing anything. Now I've got people tweeting. All right, stop it. It is, so that's going to be fun. Nobody tweeting in this thing. All right. My name's Charles Herring. I'm sorry, we're almost there. Go to the tempo now. No, this is way worse. Last year I talked about flowchart for 45 minutes. It was uber exciting stuff. All right, but it's useful. It's useful. It's too much fiber, and that's all. All right. Do it! All right, anyway. All right. It's working.
So if you have any questions, that's it for the day.
All right. So thanks for coming. We'll be at the bar. We'll be at Hot Cat if there's any questions about the presentation. So today we're going to focus on higher level events. And so there's other things that we're working on, other things we have, but this is the first piece we really want to present on evolving the thing you're operating against. And so that's what we're going to focus on today. So when we're explaining this, I thought I'd go back to high school science class and talk about how we approach this, right? How are we trying to make things better? So our purpose is to help organizations like the University of Chicago figure out how to stop failing every day, how to improve the craft in general, but organizations. On the research part, we want to look beyond information security. We're a pretty new craft. We're only a decade or two old. And so the things that we've learned, the paradigms that we've developed aren't really tested. So we wanted to look at other crafts and what can we learn. You know, I have a background in aviation maintenance. I worked on F-18s for years in the Navy. And that taught me a lot about process and how to teach people on those types of things. And so in this talk, we're largely going to focus around law enforcement. We'll have a couple of areas that came up in our research. And we used that research to get us to a hypothesis. What do we want to test? What thing is working in law enforcement that may or may not work inside information security? And so the first MO that we started testing is, the first hypothesis we started testing is MO processing, or looking at the modus operandi of a given adversary or adversaries will help us provide a higher level event type. And so to do that, we built some tools to take in data from other tools and run through this MO piece. So this is our basic framework of just research, create a hypothesis, test the hypothesis, and there's a couple of hypotheses we'll go over today, and the results. Before we get into that, I wanted to back up a little bit and give us an even set on what we have done as an industry in making things better in event aggregation and higher level processing. This is 1.0. All of us have dealt with this. Thousands, millions, or billions of events pouring into a system from, in this case, it's a snort. For every ping packet that is flagged unreachable or prohibited, you get an event. This can be millions of those, right? And this is a lot of millions.
Hi folks, I'm Geek here. Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties, so audio doesn't start back up until about the 8-minute, 42-second mark. Sorry for the inconvenience.
So the next iterative thing we did is we started classifying hosts or classifying events, right? It's exact same number of events, but they're in different buckets, right? It's denial of service versus malware or something else along those lines.
Which, from my perspective, would be helpful at this point. Now I have a classification of crime, right? I'm no longer the chief of police. Simply knowing that I have crime, I can now classify the types of crimes. And then, more importantly, I've got them laid out: who, what, and where. I've got the 5 W's now: who, what, when, where, and why. I can start pulling data out of that, understanding, okay, these are the problems, these are the resources. I can start tackling the problem, or at least responding to them. Am I reducing it? Not necessarily. Right? We're law enforcement. We're simply responding. It's a component of what we do, but we're just responding to those incidents. I know what, at least I know what to send out. If it's a child abuse case, I don't think we want the SWAT team showing up and throwing some flashbangs through the back door and going that route. So you've got to understand it. So this begins to push us in the right direction.
So grouping decontextualized events is a marginal benefit. There's a little gain to it, but you look at it in the scientific world, you create taxonomies as a basis for further study, right? So you create a research program based on that. It's very difficult, in our realm, to operationalize a response based on that. So it's useful for, you can use it for tuning, for figuring out what events that you don't want to look at necessarily, but maybe not much more than that. And an additional problem we have is that often the classification is going to come from your tool or from your vendor. There's no necessarily common consensus about what things mean or how they should be categorized. So I don't know if you can see, but I have a couple of my favorites up there. So on the far right is our SIM. One of the events, we have some MISC DOS going on. That's very difficult to have a playbook to respond to a MISC DOS. And then down at the bottom is our intrusion prevention system classifying CryptoWall ransomware as spyware. So arguably this is straight up misclassification, which can have serious implications for how we respond. So classification leads pretty naturally to try to prioritize things. So triaging this level of information, I think of as sort of naive prioritization. It's difficult to do correctly. If you're lucky, you get to choose where you're going to fail. From my history, the example I always come back to when I think of triage and prioritization like this, the biggest wide scale intrusion that I had to work on as an incident responder. It was a compromised Active Directory, dozens of posts had to be rebuilt, thousands of password resets, all this sort of stuff. So in doing network forensics, working backwards in time, trying to find the beginning, I find what I think is patient 0, going back months, and it is in fact a host that I had gotten an alert about, and I remembered seeing it at the time. But based on fairly objective criteria, I deprioritized it that particular day. It's kind of one of those things where, like, I hope I have time to come back to that. Of course, never did. Just got further behind every day, and came back to biking. So, like I said, if you're lucky, you get to choose where to fail. If not, then it's just sort of luck of the draw.
So remember, this is a map, and we've got little quadrants in there, and we've got increase in a particular type of crime in red, and dark red, and decrease in blue. So how am I going to respond to this? It doesn't clarify. I'm looking at this, and I understand that. So, okay, well, I'm going to move my resources up to the hot red zone. I put all my resources there. What does that do to the rest of the city? I've got my entire gang unit up there. I've got my vice unit up there because I want to take a multi-dimensional approach, right? I want my vice guy, I want my narco guy, and now I'm not solving anything except maybe improving the quality of life in that 4.5 square blocks right there, and the rest of the city's going to pieces. So simply prioritizing something, moving assets there, we're not accomplishing our mission of securing community, making them feel safe, reducing simply responding to their messages.
And so that puts us at that point of evolution. We can't respond to everything. We're failing almost every time. If we get anything done, that's great. Move into something the industry's been doing pretty well in recent years is moving from event-centric detection to entity-based detection, looking at instead of there's 500 malware events, what hosts have generated malware events, right? So you're looking at the host itself or for the users attached to it, and you're operating against the actual entity instead of looking at many events.
So this is a big step forward, but it comes with some caveats. So to make this really work, it assumes that the host has a stable identity, it's a stable IP or something you can use track. It's the same entity from day to day. It assumes you have the right visibility, so you're not looking at it from outside or a proxy or something in that situation. And basically, you just have enough information about the host, create a mental model, so when you get new information from the sensor, you can make the have a model, you can create a story or a situation, you can decide is this scene worth investigating or not.
So for my perspective, what we're talking about now is we're talking about focusing on suspects. The cliche is, okay, we've got some crime, round up the usual suspects. But why? The usual suspects, what correlation to the crime in Antarctica? You know, this particular guy in the 1930s was shot here, larceny, false pretenses, and he's a bad character. But where's that? That's awesome. But if I just focus on him, or even worse, this guy next to him here that somebody described to me, and I had an artist draw him, I don't even know his name. But if I'm focusing solely on them, what am I missing? I'm missing the victim. I'm missing the context. I'm missing the pretense. I'm missing the environment around him that he's operating in. So the tendency is you can't just focus on any one suspect. And particularly like a homicide investigation, you may have multiple suspects throughout the life of an investigation. And if you don't close the loop on every one of those suspects, that's what happens when I'm in the courtroom. I did this in my first murder trial. The defense attorney got up there and was killing me. Well, why did you look at this guy? Why did you look at that guy? Why didn't you continue to look at that? And you have all these other guys, but you settled on my, you're going to look at things, and you've got to be able to close the loop on it. You can't just bring a suspect in and exclude it. You gotta understand why you bring them in. If he's not the right guy, you're generating work. Make sure you can articulate why it is involved.
So the market by itself, really this year, this exists as it is, and we go from having millions of events down to having hundreds of thousands of events. Mathematically, way better. Still not operational. You can't respond to 100,000 events in a day with the size of team. So this is really where we stepped in and started looking at the research as a backdrop. How can we go from 100,000 to something we can actually eat each day? And so we don't have the answers. This is not a definitive conclusion we're coming up, but actually we were wrong in some ways, and I was going to share that with you today. But it all really started with a conversation we had with Bill about how to kill somebody.
Which led into me being here this weekend, so it's been a process. Yeah, so connecting the facts, and it's, for us, it's imperative if we're going to put somebody in life or in prison for the rest of their life, or I've handled several serial cases where we're actually people looking at death penalty. I can't just arbitrarily bring some facts into court and hope that I can connect the dots. Okay? The details have to be there. Every piece of the puzzle has to be presented. I can't afford to come in with a 1,000-piece puzzle and only have 658 pieces. So no matter how big or small, the relationship from each piece to the other piece is very, very important. In about 2 minutes now, I'm going to certify you all as homicide investigators. So when we start, here we have a victim, and technically that victim is not part of my investigation yet until the coroner's investigation first. The coroner's going to do the investigation. The terminology is the body belongs to the coroner, and then when he's done. But that information is going to tell me a lot of things. I'm going to find out who the victim is now. I'm going to find out the manner of death. I'm going to find out what type of rounds were used, if the manner of death was gunshot wounds, the type and caliber of the weapon likely used. I'm starting to develop some things that I can use in this case. And so what that allows me to do is then pivot to my other resources and say, okay, we know there's a 9mm used in this. We know that this person is from gang A, and they were killed in their neighborhood, and this type of weapon was used. I'm going to ask my gang detectives to go work gang B now, because that's the most likely component to what's going on between these two gangs. Or it could be an inside job, it could be a random job. Those are all other MOs that we have, but I'm going to consider the most obvious first. My gang guys are out working the streets. They pull over a car. They got a couple gang members in the car. There's a gun in the car. They seize the gun. They bring the gun in. It matches type and caliber. This could be the murder weapon found in the rival gang member's hood. The car, the registered owner of the car is from that gang. He's not in the car at the time. So now I have a possibly an named suspect that possibly has a murder weapon. Now I got to get down into the details. I got to fire the ballistics on that weapon. The rounds recovered from inside the victim match the rounds in terms of the rifle and the barrel of the weapon. Yes, they do. Okay, now I've got my murder weapon. perfect. I can conclusively and scientifically say that this weapon killed this person. And I can conclusively say this person is dead because the coroner told me so. This is how they died. Now, where's the registered owner of this vehicle? I start working with him, and I go, oh, look at this. He's also a documented gang member. Oh, look at this. I registered for him on cell phone. Oh, his cell phone's pinging in the area of the homicide at the time that it occurred. Okay, so now I can place him in the area. I can place him to the weapon. Now I've got his homeboys. I know who to talk to. I know who's on parole. I can start going back and talking to them and go, hey, you're on parole, aren't you? Where were you the other night? You know, and then I look at his ankle. He's wearing an ankle bracelet, and I'm like, oh, you're the same place his cell phone was. You weren't in the car, were you? Okay, well, what's that case hanging over your head? 35 years? Guess what? You're not going to come give me an interview about what went on when you were in the car. That's how you solve the case. But you've got to pull all those things together. And like I mentioned earlier, if you go down that track and it takes a left turn on you, you got to close the loop on it. You got to conclusively show why he. I spend almost half the time in homicide investigation proving things, disproving things, so that they don't come back later.
So that conversation set us up for our first hypothesis to test, right? We have something that's working that convicts criminals, murderers in law enforcement and homicide investigations, and we wanted to find out, can we derive something of value from that? And we're all familiar with things like Lockheed's cyber kill chain, MITRE has the attack continuum, and these different proposed MOs, pathways that the adversary takes. And we wanted to test and see, the basic idea was if we connect these different events together, if we have a machine that's compromised and it talks to a machine that's staging and there's privileged escalation and exfiltration happens, if we can stitch all of that together, it should give us a better event to work off of instead of just all these different separate machines or separate entities in the space. So basic hypothesis, let's go see if this approach can reduce noise. And so we plugged in some tools at the university and also some other folks that are participating with us, and we started looking at how to connect these things together. In the scope of the current research, it was network-based stuff. So was there a communication between host A and host B, right? The infected machine and the staging machine, and started stitching these things together in something we call MO, or modus operandi stitching. So this is this is from the prototype that we're running this stuff against, and just as Bill had the body on the right, my red dot is a machine that sent too much data, data out of the network. The orange dot, same place where the gun was, is the staging point, the machine that was staging the data, and the guy on the green host that's lit up on the orange line on the left was an infected, compromised host under the control of someone outside. So this was working. It does work in some areas, some caveats to talk about. And then at the bottom we have the timeline of these communications, the progression of things that are happening. And one thing we realized is a breakdown of the paradigms between law enforcement and InfoSec. Something we had going for us is Bill never gets to stop a murder, hardly ever. He starts when the body shows up. No one shows up and says, I'm going to kill someone next Tuesday, or it's not how it normally happens. For us, we can see this. If we know what the steps are going to be, we can start looking for it before the data leaves or the disk is encrypted for ransomware or something along those lines. But there are some challenges.
So established that the concept of an MO is useful and important. Saw an example of one on the screen just now. So, but that doesn't answer the question of what MOs are useful to look at. So earlier Charles referenced some of the better known ones, Lockheed Martin's cyber kill chain. MITRE has TTPs to sort of complement that. Those are good starting points, and those are some tentative answers, but I think Lockheed in particular sometimes asserts that they have the answer, this is the kill chain, which I think that it's way too soon to say anybody has the answer, the MO, the kill chain. So I think there's still a lot of room for investigation. People need to keep an open mind and generate data and look at data and figure out what MOs actually are useful.
So now you're all newly minted homicide detectives. The scenario I gave you would have been a fairly common scenario in terms of gang murders. Involving a handgun, involving a car, shooting from the car, they got out of the car. So The equivalent would be to say, okay, in order for this to be classified as a gang murder, it has to have a handgun and it has to have a vehicle. Otherwise, it's not gang related, which is great up until all of a sudden we have an investigation involving a knife. So if I walk in and say, oh, I'm in a gang neighborhood and this looks like a gangbanger, but he was stabbed, it's not gang related. Because, right? If the gun wasn't used, it doesn't fit the right MO. You have to develop an investigative strategy. You have to develop an investigative theory, and you have to work off of those. And that's the good detectives are the ones who can do 2 or 3 theories, 2 or 3 investigative techniques, strategies at a time, and work in parallel and work in concert. So let me change the scenario here, though. If I tell you that I then find out the victim, based on his manner of dress, is Crip, and that he was killed in the parking lot at a predominantly blood bar, and he was stabbed, is now likely that we're back to a gang homicide. Yeah, this guy was from out of his hood, he's at the bar, the rival gang, nobody had a gun at the time. It is gang. The MO discussed earlier. So we have to stay out of that. We walk into every case open-minded. What's the theory on this one? What's the strategy on that one? And how's that going to change over time? You have to be adaptive. The detectives that come and go in less than a year when they work homicide are the ones that can't do that. This is my investigative theory. They get 6 months through it, and they disprove their own investigative theory, and then they don't know what to do. And you're stuck. And now you're failing that case with cold. You're not solving it.
So we had a retreat a couple of months ago, whenever, but we're up in the mountains in Colorado trying to work through some of this together, and I'm sitting there and we realize we're getting false negative conditions on some of the MOs, whether we're using kill chain or attack or whatever. And so we're sitting there trying to create yet another arbitrary MO. And so, well, this can't be the way we keep doing it, right? That we build a better mousetrap, and then the bad guy finds a way to act different, use poison or a knife if we're looking for guns. So came up with an interesting idea that you can do in computers that you really can't do in law enforcement, which is calculate every possible pathway between the bad guy and the death, right? And so in the test, we have 7 different sets, things like malware-infected machine, machine flag for privilege escalation, data staging, data exfiltration. So we have 7 sets. So if we do n factorials, it's 7 times 6, I'm going to get the idea. It's 5,040 possible combinations or pathways between those things. And so through that, we haven't wrapped this up enough to present the data on it, but it has helped us build better MOs because we're observing what the criminal is actually doing instead of telling the system what the criminal will do, right? So we're seeing the pathways, new things that they're doing, which turns out to be a pretty good method for building MOs. Instead of just arbitrarily proposing one and testing it, we observe first and then go off of it. So we take all these different sets and connect them in different ways. So there were some ups and downs of the findings in this round of research. We did go from 100,000 hosts to investigate each day, around that, to about 100 to 150 incidents is what matches on the MOs in a day, and that's good. 100's way better than 100,000, but it's still not enough. And we're also detecting these false negative situations, things that were slipping through, which had to be investigated from the 2.0 model. So the things that weren't connected into an MO needed to go and be investigated as a host or user individually, right? So but it did help. It was a great step forward, and it did put us into a whole tangent of research around what is the right MO, what are effective MOs, how do we reduce false negative conditions in the system.
So what we're doing is the equivalent would be if this vehicle had 30 rounds shot into it from an AK-47. I could show up at the scene and say, okay, I've got 30 shootings. Which technically I do. Every time the trigger was pulled and that weapon fired around, that's one shooting. So I could show up and say, I had 30 shootings. Now, the chief of police is going to lose his mind Monday morning when he finds out they got 30 shootings Sunday night alone. Right? And then, we've got 30 shootings. I got to assign 30 detectives to 30 different shootings. Now I'm going to take all that evidence down and have it processed with my scientific investigation people, and I'm going to give them 30 different requests for all this evidence I'm processing here for crime. And It's not. It's actually 60 because you've got one round in each shell casing. Now you've got to go pull all the rounds out of the car. There's going to be some that aren't accounted for. And I've got to start looking for each of the 30 suspects that fired each of these 30 rounds. The end result being I'm going to probably find one suspect, and the other 29 cases are going to go unsolved. In actuality, I had a singular event here, right? It was one shooting, and so you take all that evidence and it allows you to look at a singular incident. So let the evidence dictate what you're looking at. The evidence in context, a singular event with multiple levels of evidence. Okay, so going forward, that was evidence leading to a single incident. What if you had multiple incidents? So let's say we got a serial murder case. I've got 5 murders. Well, one of the concerns is that this person, if we really think that someone's responsible for these 5 murders, these are going to be a 6th, this is going to be a 7th, this is going to be an 8th. Very few murders get solved in the first 48. Whoever's watched the TV show. They only show you the ones that actually happened. In 6 years in South Central, I solved maybe 2 or 3 murders in 48 hours. And it wasn't my investigative skill that did it. That's what I told my boss. The reality was is that, the suspect came back to the crime scene and the witness said, there he is. It was that kind of amazing detective work that made me a superstar for at least 5 minutes. Because then he'd ask me about the case I hadn't solved in the month before. So I was right back to the talk. But so these incidents, trying to solve these incidents over a period of time is not going to stop the 6 months. It's not going to stop the 7. In theory, if you could shut down one of these cases, then you may catch the suspect. But in the meantime, and the assumption is that it's the same suspect. So let's talk about a gang war or a gang feud. You got 2 gangs shooting with one another. Solving the case, one of those murders is going to stop the gang war. You have 5 different shooters. If you're shooting back and forth to each other, you're not going to solve the problem. The problem is a gang feud. You have to understand that. So now you got your detectives working the homicide piece, but you got your gang detectives trying to put a cap on the gang problem, and we're looking at why do we have a gang feud? Well, there's an influx of narcotics coming into that part of the city, and they're fighting over the narcotic traffic. So the way to stop murder number 6, if you get on top of the gang members, shut them down, not give them the freedom of movement to operate in the city, and get rid of the narcotics flow coming, that's going to stop murder number 6. In the meantime, that allows us to focus on the task at hand. Murder 1 through 5.
So in IT, we don't have a link board per se, but keeping with the theme of looking to other fields for models and tools, look at the field of biology. There is an open source software package called Cytoscape. As you see on the left there, it visualizes molecular interaction networks, gene expression, and all sorts of things I'm not qualified to talk about. That's what that is. So the image on the right is a screenshot of what you see if you are a researcher at the University of Chicago and you log into the Central High Performance Computing Cluster. One of the tools available to you is Cytoscape. So I want to clear the university didn't have anything necessarily to do with Cytoscape in particular. My point is, though, that it is a tool in the toolbox of researchers there. You get in this cluster, you type load module Cytoscape, and you can start doing research with it.
So that took us to a modified hypothesis. We believed MOs were going to be the salvation, and it fell short with our limitations. So we said, what if we take these incidents that we're detecting and start stitching them together using a Cytoscape-like approach? And so we brought in Cytoscape, pushed that into the data, and started connecting these incidents together. And so here's a screenshot from the prototype. So that top line, that green to orange to red, is the same thing we looked at earlier from the incident perspective, that it was a progression of the infected guy to staging to exfiltration. And then, but we also see there's a second one that's en route on the bottom, right? He's already staging again inside of the network, but he hasn't dropped the body, hasn't hit the floor yet, right? So it's he hasn't exfiltrated yet. So the same actor is still working in this scenario. He's been successful once. We have an opportunity to stop him. But this is the general idea on the Cytoscape approach, and it really is interesting. I don't understand anything about bioinformatics. I have a buddy who has a degree in that and brews beer at home all day. So he has a PhD from Harvard. And anyway, beat him up. And then, but I did call him up and say, how do you use this? And it was a very interesting piece. But we did also find something else that was surprising as we started looking at these events. This is what we came to call the cloud of death. When you start stitching all these events together, this thing would happen from time to time. And you would think in your mind when you see something like this, it must be a big event, right? It's like a crime spree or something. But what it turned out to be was noise. It was an indication that attackers don't normally take over 80 machines. They don't normally pivot that much. They're not going to make it more complicated than they have to. And so it's like if you're in bed and all of your windows are rattling and people are knocking on every door, it's probably not a burglar. Your house is probably on fire and you need to get out. It's something legitimate. And in this case, the thing in the middle, you can't really see it, that yellow dot's the DNS server that was flagged incorrectly by the school that was reporting in. And so it was generating this amount of noise. And so there's actually two tools involved here that were configured incorrectly. And so this is a great way for us to go back and fix those reporting tools.
So getting bad tips, getting false leads, having things reporting incorrectly in law enforcement, absolutely. An example would be a federal case I worked a couple years back that somebody was putting what looked like explosive devices and then driving around and putting them in people's mailboxes. And like anything the FBI does, they got very excited and wanted to get as much information out to the public as soon as they possibly could without really any validation, without really looking over the keep or holding back a little bit longer. So they put out a vehicle description of a delivery vehicle, mostly white with some different colors on it, blue type vehicle, not a picture of it, just describe it like I described it. A delivery vehicle, white, red markings on it, stopping at people's mailboxes, right, and dropping off explosives. They solved the case very quickly after that. Clearly not, right? So because they had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of leads that people were calling in, and because people were assuming that maybe that's not real, you know, hundreds of people believe that. Now the FBI's out trying to chase the postal service around, and you know, we get
shoot off. But the findings of this is pretty interesting. There weren't any false negative conditions that came into ELA or incident link analysis that we had in MO. We did inherit any of the false negatives that existed in MO processing, but nothing new in this mix. It does require gap coverage in that if you don't collect all the guns, you can't connect the gun to the body, right? If the schools, you don't have visibility that's reporting in, the sensor network isn't collecting the data, you're not going to be able to connect these things together. And that was one thing. But the daily counts are crazy. They're under a dozen. And so really we looked at this as the major crime. If you have one of these things going on, work it out. That's the first thing you work out. And then go down to the next level, that 2.0 level of dealing with the host and the users, and then start whittling away at those. And we're doing some additional research on that 2.0 stuff. But the ILA, or the incident link analysis, is pretty exciting stuff. When you have one come up, everybody gets to get excited. You're watching the kill chain, or however you want to think about the MOs progressing. And it doesn't have to just be data exfiltration, right? It could be ransomware spreading, or whatever it is, whatever the different MO of the individual is. And so just wrapping this up, because my view is up, can't see that was being recorded. A couple of things we founded from Alabama. Sorry, came out. I am really, that's true. Not that if anyone's from Alabama, roll tide. But the first thing we found was MO analysis can reveal these major crimes. It can stitch things together. It's dependent upon the MOs. This is much the same kind of lesson we learned in signature creation, that your tools are only as good as the signatures are. Otherwise, you have something like ping packet just happened. I don't care, right? Is it the ping of death or is it not? And so this, the MOs are really the fuel of this. And getting those right and tuning those are hugely important. So that needs to continue. And also, we initially just had a linear path, that it was step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and we found out sometimes they skip it. You know, I don't need to do privilege escalation because you have a very insecure network. I just log in, or I don't have to do anything because you didn't think to put a password on it. And so there's steps that can be skipped, or there's holes in our coverage. We can't see the privileged escalation because we don't have the tool for that, so we created these bypasses, if you remember from the first slide, of different pathways to get to the ending. ILAs are working great. Incident link analysis is one thing we're really excited about, and we're going to continue to push that forward. The tuning piece, which is another area we focus on, is how do we make tools operate better. This is a great piece of fuel for that, to come back and say which tools are misreporting things that are wasting our time, right? Where we can just reconfigure the initial source. The false negative piece, we're still going to be stuck in this 2.0 component until we have complete visibility and have progressive or predictive MOs going on to where the system is rolling around. And we also need to move, our next area that we've already started rolling out is looking at connections, not just network connections, but authentication connections, file hashes that exist as a connection. As Bill said, it's not always a ballistic report. It could be something else that ties this, and it could be the shell casing or something else. So with that said, if anyone's interested in participating in this, and it's an exhaustive process to have to deal with me and the team on a regular basis, so be sure you want to do this. But there's at which.foo/beta, there's an application. We're working on two things. We're looking at tools that we're integrating and testing and looking at, and then different verticals and the different use cases there. The stuff we demoed here is a prototype. There's a commercial data that the team should have ready the first week of August. So let us know if you're interested in that. And again, these are the areas we focus on. Today we looked at higher level events, but the tuning, the reduction of noise, and really what we want is for an organization to wake up in the morning, have a cue that they're going to actually accomplish that day. And so I think you should have hope that that's possible, whether I'm the guy, this is the team that does it, or someone else does it. We are making progression towards that, and we don't have to lose every day. So hope that was helpful. Last plug, Hopcat, there's free beer at 5 o'clock. Cisco is paying for that beer. I'm allowed to invite all of you there, and I will be there drinking beer, so you're welcome to join us. And that is it. Cue applause. Any questions? Anyone have a question? Yeah, what's up? I can run it on my Surface. So it's So the good thing is it doesn't have to be in real time. When we first started doing it, it would take sometimes 12 or 14 hours to refresh the data stack, to pull in all the sets and look at all of the connections and then connect all those things together. And largely we're using somebody else's horsepower. So, we'll make an API call to QRadar or to StealthWatch or to AMP or to ArcSight or something. And then it prepares the return, and then we just digest the return and then connect it together. So it runs 4 gigs of RAM on a VM, 4 gigs of RAM and 4 slices, and it can probably run on two CPUs. So it's lightweight in that regard, but it also doesn't have to be real time. You don't have I/O problems that something processing packets would have to deal with. So, yeah. Any other questions? All right, get out of my room. Thank you for coming. See you at the bar. Thanks, guys.